Hello again, it's Carol Anderson once more on a Monday for another week of Met HD streaming. We're starting off this week brilliantly with Mozart's masterpiece, The Marriage of Figaro. I'm so excited. Le Nozze di Figaro. I'll just call it Figaro from now on just because I'm lazy. Figaro is the first of three operas created by the amazing partnership of Mozart and Lorenzo da Ponte from 1786. Don Giovanni followed in 1787 and Così fan tutte in 1790. Mozart, of course, died in 1791, so one wonders if there was more genius to be created by this pairing if Mozart had not died so suddenly and unusually young. The story of the character Figaro originally was told through a trilogy of comedies by the playwright Pierre Beaumarchais, which were presented between 1775 and 1792. Figaro, the Count Almaviva, and the Countess Rosina appear, or Rosine, as she's referred to in the French play, appear in all three episodes. We have Le Barbier de Seville, which is the Barber of Seville. We have Le Mariage du Figaro and La Mère Coupable, the Guilty Mother, which is some way the basis for Massenet's opera Cherubin and also the John Corigliano opera The Ghosts of Versailles. Not literally the plot, but the inspiration. So the plays and their subject matter are products of the immense social and political change that was flooding France. Of course, it started years before, but we had had the American Revolution and then the French Revolution came about. So the plays, if you think about the fact that the first two happened before the French Revolution in 1792, La Mère Coupable happened after the Revolution. They're full of social commentary and thinly disguised stabs at actual people in French politics or in French social circles. The second episode, Le Mariage du Figaro, was temporarily banned from public performances after a private reading that was staged for Louis XVI due to its merciless skewering of the idea of aristocratic privilege. Figaro's fifth act monologue, the opera only has 4 acts, often done in first and second act, third and fourth act with just one intermission. I'm not sure how many intermissions we have tonight. But Figaro's fifth act of the play, Monologue, was particularly offensive, and this is what the translation is. No, my lord Count, you shan't have her, you shall not have her. Just because you are a great nobleman, you think you are a great genius. Nobility, fortune, rank, position. How proud they make a man feel. What have you done to deserve such advantages? Put yourself to the trouble of being born, nothing more. For the rest, a very ordinary man. Whereas I, lost among the obscure crowd, have had to deploy more knowledge, more calculation and skill, merely to survive than has sufficed to rule all the provinces of Spain for a century. It's pretty scathing. So when we get to the beginning of Le Mariage, the Count has become bored after only 3 years with his marriage to Rosine, or Rosina. He decides to exercise his privilege that had fallen out of favor. It's known as the droit de seigneur. Basically, it means that the aristocrat that ran an estate had the right to experience the joys of time with any young woman in his thrall, in his realm, so to speak, that were bound to him as serfs or peasants on the night before her wedding or before she marries the person she's chosen. So he decides he wants to exercise this right with Figaro's bride, Suzanne, and he would get to enjoy Suzanne first, as it were. Figaro and Suzanne, and later joined by Rosine, Cherubin, Barbarina, they have different names, but all the other characters devise a complicated plan to make a fool of the Count. So this idea also of a common man, a peasant, if you will, a serving man, getting the best of an aristocrat also ruffled the royal feathers. I want to talk a little bit about Da Ponte. He's a fascinating human, and there are a number of nonfiction works about him. One of the ones I've enjoyed is a novel, or not a novel, or a telling of his life, a biography, that's the word I'm looking for, called The Librettist of Venice. He was born in the province that Venice was part of as Emanuele Conegliano to a Jewish family. His father was widowed and converted the entire family to Catholicism so he could marry a Catholic woman. As was the custom in such situations, Emanuele took the name of the bishop who baptized him and took the name Lorenzo da Ponte. Da Ponte eventually became a priest. He was very, very well educated, but he did lead a profligate and dissolute life. He did not lead a priestly life. He lived in Venice for a while, where his acquaintances included the actual historical figure of Casanova, but several affairs and dabbling in the wrong circles led to his banishment from Venice. He then went to Austria, thought he was going to be at a position in I think Dresden, but that didn't come through, so he found himself in Vienna. There he became the court librettist at the Italian theater, and he created opera with Salieri, with Vicente Martini Soler, and also with Mozart. Upon the loss of his Austrian patron, Da Ponte became itinerant. He tried to go to Paris, but it was politically unstable, found himself in London for a while, and then eventually came to New York and spent some time in Pennsylvania as well. He ran a grocery store, gave Italian lessons, and eventually became an unpaid, but a professor nonetheless at Columbia University, the first, I think, Italian professor they had. Throughout his life, he continued to champion opera and particularly Mozart's work in New York City, and he became an American citizen at age 79. In 1833, at age, I think it's 84, I think it was a few years later, he founded the Italian Opera House in New York. It failed after being rather poorly managed. He was not a great businessman, but it also was eventually destroyed by fire. But this organization sort of paved the way for opera in New York City, and eventually the Academy of Music was founded in 1854, and then the Metropolitan Opera Association in 1880. Mozart and Da Ponte were a librettist pairing match made in heaven. Today we think first of Mozart because he was, of course, an incredible musical genius. But at the time they met, Da Ponte was actually the famous one who was doing great things. He was 7 years older, and he had had success with Salieri and with Martini Soler. And Mozart was still trying to establish his name. Mozart approached Da Ponte a number of times to try to see if he could partner with him, but Da Ponte rebuffed him because Mozart wasn't important enough, and Da Ponte was overworked. So finally, Mozart approached Da Ponte with the idea of setting the Marriage of Figaro, and Da Ponte finally could not refuse. The details of the plot to Marriage of Figaro do become rather confused and convoluted, so I'm just going to share with you the scenario of the show, and then obviously you can watch it. You can read a more detailed synopsis, or you can just watch it unfold. So the Count has become bored, as I said, and Figaro is plotting to involve himself with Susanna. Figaro discovers this. Susanna has to point this out to him. And so, of course, he determines that he's not going to let that happen. The opera begins with one of the most brilliant overtures of anything, and it never fails. I listen to it. I hear those first bassoon moments, and I am just full of delight. Complicated. I'm not going to go. But, I mean, doesn't that just make you smile? It's just so joyful. We have to go through a lot to get the joyful payoff in the end, but we'll get there. Then the overture reminds us that we're going to get there eventually. So I talked about Susanna. The opera opens with Figaro being thrilled that they have been awarded the best room in the state because for their honeymoon. Not their honeymoon, but I mean to establish their married life. But Susanna is not nearly as excited about it. And she points out that he said, well, you're just going to be so close. When the Countess rings, you'll just pop over. When the Count rings, I can just pop over. And then she says, actually, when the Count rings for you and you go away to do something for him, then the Count will come back to me. So she points out to Figaro that, in fact, the convenience of the room is actually for the convenience of the Count. And we have these fun little, this is the music of that little duet. He says, if my lady calls you in the middle of the night, here's the bell. Din din, din din, in due passi da quella fuggir. You can be there in 2 steps. And he goes on and explains that. Then she says, later on, when the Countess, the Count calls, din din, don don, and she always says it very much like that, and it's echoed by lower instruments. That's sort of the ominous thing. And then she says, after don don, the devil's going to show up at my doorstep. And then this is where Figaro is educated as to what's really going on. The women are paying a little bit more attention, I guess. So the Figaro is horrified at this and says he's going to vows that he's going to make the Count dance to his tune. And he sings this in an aria called Se vuol ballare. If you'd like to dance, Signor Little Count, and he says contino, not just conte, but contino, which is quite pejorative. He's just making fun of him, you little Count. I will play the tune for you. Figaro is a peasant, and a lot of his music or a serving man. He's a valet, I suppose. And most of his music is a little bit less elegant, but at this moment he's kind of parodying a minuet, which is an aristocratic dance. So it's so elegant, which is not really Figaro's character, but he's just saying, I will play the tune. So, as we move forward, we discover a lot more characters. We meet Cherubino, who's a young boy played by a trouser mezzo, so a mezzo-soprano dressed in male attire. And all of these other characters, Barbarina, the gardener, Antonio Barbarina, is she's actually described in the play as someone with a lot of, how did they put it? Something like someone with a lot of friends, if you know what I mean. So we get to the second act, and a lot of things have come to a head at this point. Cherubino has been sent off to war to get him out of the way, but then he comes back and there's a whole bunch of disguises and missed opportunities and whatnot. Anyway, we come to the point where the Count is banging on the Countess's door, trying to demanding who is in there. And this is Susanna is actually in there, and Cherubino has been in and out, but the Count is very suspicious and jealous, which is ironic considering he's the one that's trying to droit de seigneur his way out of life. So we have the finale is what we call a chain finale. It's where we have a lot of sections that are key related and dramatically related, but they chain together as people enter, more and more characters enter. We start with just the Countess and the Count, and then we see Susanna. Figaro comes in, then Antonio comes in, and then we have the 3 baddies, Marcellina, Bartolo, and I'm forgetting the other name, but there's another one. Corzio? Anyway. And then we've got everybody on stage by the end of it all. So it gets progressively more crowded on stage, and progressively more complex, and the tempo kind of gradually builds. There's an alternation of slower and faster tempi, but ultimately it's sort of a meta crescendo of energy and speed. So here's, for instance, one of the transitions. Count and Countess are fighting because she's like, well, there was nobody in here. And he's like, I'm going to kill you. And she's like, well, I'm by myself. And he's really angry. And so we have them going back and forth. She's talking about, blind jealousy. And he's like, guilty reason. Nope, something else is happening, and we're going to change tempo and modulate. Susanna, the cabinet where he thinks Cherubino is hiding, opens to reveal Susanna. The Countess is also surprised. Susanna! And we have surprised music. Signore, why are you surprised? The pronto prendete. You're gonna kill the page. This poor page, which is me. You see her before you. So she's saying, you're ready to kill the page, but here I am. You're not going to kill me, are you? Later on in the finale, we have the baddies. It was Marcellino, Basilio, and Bartolo. That's who it was. Curzio and Basilio are often played by the same character tenor. So this is their music. Poi signor che giusta siete. They come in with a legal case. They explain all of this. There's a lot of arguing. Then we get a little bit faster. Più moto. Same music. We're escalating, but we're going to escalate a little further. So I'm going to move us into the final stretch of this Act 2 finale. Rush to the end of the second act when everything is quite messed up. This has an influence on later works. I think I've talked at certain moments when we've done Barber Seville or Cenerentola how the first act always ends with this moment of confusion and stupore, stunnedness, and that has its roots in this opera buffa. So, things are not always crazy. I just played a bunch of crazy things, but there are some sublime moments. The Countess's 2 arias are ridiculously beautiful. Susanna has an Act 4 aria where she's just really finally calm. There's a moment of calm in the middle of all the plotting, and it's De vieni non tarda, where she's encouraging her love to come to her in this beautiful garden. It's just amazing. And then one of my favorite moments is this duet from the third act, Sull'aria. It's where the Countess and Susanna are writing a letter to lure the Count into the garden, but they write this flowery little love letter. It's an amazing moment, and I have to just sort of, I've been doing movie nights with a friend of mine weekly, and last week's movie was The Shawshank Redemption, which I had seen, but it had been a while since I'd seen the whole thing through. My favorite scene in The Shawshank Redemption, and there are many amazing scenes, is where the main character, Andy Dufresne, infiltrates, he's unpacking library materials, and he finds this album of the Marriage of Figaro. So he locks himself into the main office, turns on the PA system for the prison, and plays the LP of this duet. And everyone in the prison yard, all the prisoners, all the guards don't stop, but the prisoners all stop, and they have this moment outside of their prison life for a second. And it continues while the prison guards are breaking into the office and trying to stop this. And the narrator, Red, Morgan Freeman, who has a much more interesting voice than me, says the most beautiful thing about the arts. To this day, I have no idea what those 2 Italian ladies were singing about. Truth is, I don't want to know. Some things are best left unsaid, sorry. Truth is, I don't want to know. Some things are better left unsaid. I would like to think they were singing about something that was so beautiful it can't be expressed in words and make your heart ache because of it. I tell you, those voices soared higher and farther than anybody in a gray place dares to dream. It was like some beautiful bird flapped into a drab little cage and made these walls dissolve away. For the briefest moment, every last man in Shawshank felt free. So I'll end with a little bit of this duet. It's really stunning. And then I suggest that you find that film. It's a difficult story, but it ends beautifully. And this is a sublime moment in the middle of it. stunning moment, of which there are many more. But I loved that, and I loved remembering how that was used in this amazing film, The Shawshank Redemption. So, and I think that's really that's an amazing statement too about what opera and what art can do for us, where he says, I tell you, those voices soared higher and farther than anybody in a gray place dares to dream. I mean, we're all kind of in gray places right now, aren't we? It was like some beautiful bird flapped into a drab little cage and made these walls dissolve away. So I think it's really kind of a beautiful quote and a beautiful sentiment for where we are today. Thank you again for joining me as things start to open up. Keep washing your hands and be safe and smart about your decisions, and take care of one another. Thanks for your support of the opera in Utah or wherever you are. And thanks especially to Judy Brady and Drew Browning for making these broadcasts or live streams possible. We'll see you next time. Thanks.